guys, what is going on? Redmaster here, and welcome back to another Cards and Castles video, where today we are going to be going over a tier list for the changed cards of the August 2018 patch. It's been, about half a month since we got this patch, so plenty of time for decks and cards alike to have, developed enough on the ladder and on the leaderboard to be given a proper tier ranking. So we will be, of course, going over some of the highlights. Now, of course, not all the changes will be talked about. I've, again, put a list below of sort of all the cards that have been changed and whether or not they have been changed in tiers, either going down or up in tiers or remaining the same too. That is a possibility. Some changes don't really warrant enough to grant a card a sort of tier up, if you will. So with that being said, let's just jump right into it and get into the first card that I think needs to be addressed in this sort of patch tier list. The card we'll be talking about is, of course, the Arbiter's return. Now, Arbiter has gone, it went through a pretty minor change, but it's one that certainly affects the card. He is now an A tier rather than an S tier, so not really an instant auto include anymore, and we definitely see a decrease in some Arbiter uses, as well as sort of a general, there hasn't been too many Crusader problem decks out there recently. For those of you who still run the Crusader deck, you're most likely going to run maybe an Arbiter's Return or two, which is okay, but I think the thing about this change that's, important is the fact that Arbiter's Return is coming in at a later time. The problem with Arbiter in its previous state was that it can come out at an earlier time and can really it can basically turn the tide of a game. Now, granted, it can still turn those tides, but at a slower pace, which is important. Usually, an Arbiter's Return can save people a turn before they're about to really go out. So with Arbiter's Return being 8 gold, it'll be harder for players to really save themselves with Arbiter's Return. Not so much harder, but it will be definitely harder, which I think is the important thing to take note of. Also, going along with the cost change, the cheeky Arbiter Detonation combo can no longer work. Of course, Arbiter and Detonation combined is now an 11 total gold play. And if you still want to pull off that move, you're going to have to set up Detonation before and have really an open board to do so. So it shouldn't really work out too well, especially if you need units out on the board. So with that being said, I think the change to Arbiter was good and certainly helped knock it down from an auto include in every sort of Crusader deck. As I said before, we've seen less and less of Arbiter's Return since the patch. Again, it hasn't really died completely, and it's still out there in pretty big numbers. But I think the usage has been noticed to be much less than what it once originally was back pre-patch. So I think overall a good change, and hopefully Arbiter's Return isn't really super prevalent nowadays as it was previously. Next up is everyone's favorite Unholy Altar. Now, Altar did get a big significant change. Of course, not only did he get a cost increase, but he also got factionized into the Warlock. So that is a pretty big sort of change for just a single card. Now, before, of course, the 2G neutral, this card was everywhere. You would not find a deck up in the higher levels of play without an Unholy Altar, which, is reasonable. A spawner that can bring out tokens every turn, especially them, of that size, 2/2, regardless of if it was a slower unit or not, it's still a pretty big unit, especially when you can fill up the board with multiple spawners, thereby bringing out multiple zombies. So, what is so significant, though, about this change? Sorry about that. No. So the thing about Unholy Altar, it did get marked down from an auto-include S into a B for two reasons. Of course, one, its factionization is a big thing to take note of, obviously. I've mentioned this back in the patch update video itself. But the fact that this card is now in Warlocks is going to, especially, it's going to tremendously drop the usage of this card. It can really only, I think, fit in, like I said, only Warlock decks, but even then, again, the second aspect, 3 gold. 3 gold is a big turn, especially in a game. It can really help shift the tide, or it can really provide a big opening play. And if you play Unholy Altar that turn, you've essentially just made yourself an open target. The altar can be burned, your opponent can end up rushing you with more units, and then you don't know what to do because all you have is a sluggish zombie. So again, this card isn't really as useful as it once was. I think these were definitely two solid changes to again knock the card down. So it is going from an S tier to a B tier, generally because it's going to be much harder for an opponent to use, for a player to use, with still the easily killable aspect of it. You can simply burn it, you can companion rush it, you can chain it, any of those kind of things. So you know Altar being knocked down, S to B is sort of the basis of this little section here. But again, a good change for Altar to limit its play. Next, I move on to Salahar Voyager. Now, I actually did not change Salahar Voyager's overall tier, because I think it's important to note that Salahar really didn't change. Now, what I mean by that, originally she was a 3-2 body. Now she's simply a 2-1. So, the power of a Hasan City Guard, okay, that doesn't really stop people from running, Hasan City Guards in their deck. Again, they're usually more using it for the double guard aspect rather than just the Voyager body, or the one body. But anyway, I'm getting off track here. The reason she hasn't changed, again, like I said, the ability really hasn't changed. She's still an amazingly strong 4-drop, which can bring in a big sort of support monster with her, whenever she comes out. So the fact that they didn't really change that aspect of her kind of means that she can still stay at the same place. Sure, she is weaker, but not by much. I mean, 2-1, that's really just a -1 to both attack and health. I mean, maybe she can't trade with, everything now before she goes, or when she comes out in the field, so that might be a plus to her. But again, the monster aspect is more of the reason why people run Voyager. So if that really doesn't change, there's no sort of tier drop for her. So I think she still deserves an A tier, and that's kind of why. Regardless of the stats, her ability is what's really important to her as a card. Next up, we're going to start getting into some cards that were improved, and one of them is the Sleeping Dojo. Of course, this used to be a card that really didn't do a whole lot for Awakened decks. I mean, originally, Sleeping Dojo was still a presence in Awakened decks, but really it was just this underutilized, tossed aside kind of card, where it would just give, a +1/+1, I think, to units that awakened, which is not really too impressive, especially since the whole idea for Awakened decks is to just reawaken. I mean, it gave them more of a focus of like, alright, you awaken them multiple times and you can really beef them up. Which is okay, but I mean, the Awakened deck really did lack what this Sleeping Dojo now provides, a draw engine. It's similar to Mystic Dojo, but I think this one is much more controlled. Obviously, I did mention this more in, again, the patch review video itself. But I did want to take note that it is a more powerful card than it once was. Obviously, jumping from a C to a B, which is, again, a good sign. It, boosts the card's power. Mystic Dojo is, of course, at a B as well, so I think that's a fair way to rank Sleeping Dojo. Just, again, it's become more of a draw engine, and it's in a deck that is kind of prevalent right about now. But, it can't really do much, and it is, again, an easily burnable target, like all buildings are, so for that reason, it is going to be at a B tier level. So, again, not much else to say about that, other than that, I think it's definitely what the Awakened decks need now, a more, reliable draw engine for their decks. Next up, I want to talk about Shoden the Zen Master. Now, Shodhan did receive sort of a buff out of nowhere, I think. If you ask people what they were expecting from the next patch, the Zen Master buff was not something that was, on people's radars. Now, Shodhan did get an increase in health to about 8, I think, from 6. So that is something that is very unexpected, and I think that what can propel Shodhan into a more A tier level rather than being at the B tier. A 4/8 is definitely a tricky body to get rid of, especially considering the fact that if you just take off the filter, nothing really is as high as Shodhan is in terms of health. You might consider, okay, well, actually, no. Let's keep it to 7 gold, actually, because that's what Shodhan is in. So really from Villaroth backwards, 6, which is 7. A lot of units have 7 in the eye. Okay, so the Ranger might be the only tie, but considering the fact that Shodhan can gain a secret attribute, I think is also something to take note of. Obviously, those include range, rampage, chain, explosive, etc. So the ability to have that sort of secret attribute going along with this 4/8 body, which is again probably the second biggest body of the 7 gold slot. I think that's definitely something to take note of for ninja decks in particular, because ninjas Personally, I don't think they don't like to go into that late game all too often. But if you're giving them more of a late game option in the form of Shoden, I think they're going to certainly take that, regardless of whatever faction they're running it in, because you can get any sort of beneficial buff. As long as you're not running Mono Ninja with Shoden, you guys should be fine with, finding some sort of effective use for Shoden as a late game boss, whether it just be an Awakened Dex or other sort of ninja decks in general. If you're missing a late game boss, Shoden I think is definitely a more viable option now with the extra increase to health, harder to get rid of, which means a more reliable body. So a great change to Shoden, and definitely deserves a jump up from a B tier to an A tier. From there, we move on to probably the biggest jump in tiers on this list. I'm talking about Southport Cannoneer going from an F tier to a B tier. Now, Cannoneer has made several appearances post-patch in various pirate decks, whether they be range dedicated or not. The fact is that Cannoneer is just simply a big range body, which is something that we don't see all too often. I think this might be the second biggest ranged body aside from Eye of Flame, but no one really uses Eye of Flame all too much. And the fact that this guy is a basic too means that he's pretty much can be anywhere and everywhere. Everyone should have at least 3 copies of this card from the get-go. So that sort of power in pirate decks to come out with a 5-6 range body is incredible, and especially in greed decks too, where you can instantly ramp up. I think if you play a Southport Captain turn 3, you can have a Southport Cannoneer out by turn 4, which can definitely be a problem for your opponent, seeing as how if they are running Warlocks, they simply can only Blue Fire Bolt it, and the Cannoneer will tank that hit. It is a 5-6 after all. It doesn't have to, it can tank a Blue Fire Bolt is what I'm saying here, people. It's a monster if ramped out early. So definitely I think we're going to be seeing a lot of Cannoneer as the months go forward. And I'm excited to see where this card goes, because it's certainly been one of those cards that's been sitting on the back burner. Obviously seeing no play pre-patch. But with this, I think he will definitely get some more love. Whether that is for the good or bad in terms of, the ladder and rank competition is still yet to be seen, though. And for our final card, we'll be taking a look at the Magma Sword. Now, the Magma Sword didn't really get too much of a change. He did get his stats reduced and his cost reduced. But I think people have overlooked Magma Sword as sort of a more overall useful card. Obviously, when you think of Magma Sword, you're going to be thinking of, alright, this card is more of a dinosaur-based card. He kind of belongs in dinosaur decks. Now, while that is true, I think Magma Sword is overlooked as sort of the building removal. Again, even though it's in Warlocks, I think other than the fact that this is, it's not direct damage from Warlocks, this is another option to get rid of your pesky building problems. Your cards like Armory, School of Knowledge, Sleeping Dojo, Mystic Dojo. The fact that this guy has an explosive of 3 means that if he hits Castle, he'll only do 1 damage, but he'll do 3 to everything else around it, meaning that most buildings can't really tank a Magma Sword shot. So that it does force your opponent to place the, people have always placed, buildings behind castles nowadays because they're easier, they don't have a unit, and they just want to put it out there. They're not really thinking too much about where that building is, because they'll either direct burn it or they're gonna have to come forward with a unit. But with Magma Sword now, he can provide that sort of threat, that danger to the board that I don't think really has been seen before. So his change is definitely one that I think should be more looked at as sort of I can now include this in more of my decks rather than just dinosaur decks. If you want to buff him with dinosaurs and use him in a dinosaur deck, that's fine. But his change did allow him to become more of an overall useful card, which is why he jumped from a C to a B. He can be used more openly than just a dinosaur-based card. So overall, I think his change was a very good one. That being said, that's going to do it for the post-patch tier list. Let me know what you guys thought of this by giving it a like, sharing it with your friends, and leaving a comment down below what your thoughts are on some of the changes that I described, or if you guys agree or disagree with my tier list. I want to see those comments down below and spark some discussion. I always like to see how these tier lists, provoke some thought and, prompt, again, discussion, even though I just used that word 2 minutes ago. And like I said, the full tier list is in the description below, so if you guys want to read up on all of the changes or what I think of all of the cards that have been changed in this patch, again, you can read that in the description below. And if you haven't already done so, please hit that subscribe button. Make sure you support the channel, help us grow all by clicking that subscribe button at no additional cost to you. And that being said, guys, that's all from me for now. So until next time, stay gaming.